Hello, friends. Welcome to Nightmares in the Dark. Tonight I'll share a chilling story from Alaska that will haunt your dreams. Comment below if you think you could survive the cold, if you dare. Have you ever felt like the wilderness itself was watching you? Like the silence isn't just the absence of sound, but the presence of something waiting? This is what happened to me in the middle of Alaska, and I've never been able to forget it. I never thought I'd end up stranded in Alaska. I'd come up for work, seasonal surveying for an energy company, but I was naive. I thought the cold was the enemy, the wind the only thing to fear. I wasn't ready for what I'd find in the white emptiness beyond the roads. It started on a Thursday. The weather forecast had predicted clear skies, but when I left the small town of Nome and headed north toward the survey site, a sudden whiteout hit. 1 second, the horizon was blue, and the next, everything was gone. My truck's headlights barely penetrated the swirl of snow, and I realized I couldn't see the road at all. Panic settled in. I tried to retrace my route, but every landmark I thought I recognized disappeared behind a curtain of white. My GPS glitched out, showing nothing but off-grid warnings. I was completely alone, or at least I thought I was. Hours passed. My truck ran low on gas, and I knew I couldn't keep driving. So I looked for shelter. That's when I saw it. A cabin, small and dark, almost invisible against the snow. Smoke curled from a thin chimney. I didn't hesitate. Inside, the cabin was warm, almost too warm. A wood stove crackled in the corner. There were signs someone had lived here recently. A half-full coffee cup, a plate with crumbs, a blanket on a chair, but there was no one there. I settled by the fire, trying to calm down. That's when I heard it, a scratching sound at the door. I froze. My rational mind told me it could be an animal, a fox, or a raccoon. But the scratches were deliberate, heavy, like claws trying to dig through wood. I grabbed a wrench from the truck and crept toward the door. "Hello?" I called. Nothing, just scratching. I opened the door. Nothing. No footprints in the snow. Nothing but the endless white. I went back inside, shaking. That night, I barely slept. Every gust of wind sounded like footsteps outside. Every creak of the cabin felt like a warning. Around 3 a.m., I woke to whispering. Low, guttural, incomprehensible. It seemed to come from the walls themselves. The shadows in the cabin stretched toward me like fingers. I thought I was hallucinating. I had to be. But then I felt it. A cold breath on the back of my neck. I spun around. No one. The window frost had formed intricate patterns, almost like faces staring at me. My heart pounded. I ran to the door, threw it open, and into the white nothing I yelled. Silence. The next morning, I found my truck, gone. Vanished without a trace, not even tracks in the snow. I was trapped, and I realized the cabin wasn't a haven, it was a trap. For days, I stayed inside, trying to survive, rationing what little food I had. But every night the whispers returned, louder, angrier. They weren't coming from outside, they were inside me, in my mind, in my chest. The walls of the cabin pulsed, breathed, as if alive. By the fourth night, I couldn't take it. I had to leave. I wrapped myself in blankets, grabbed a flashlight, and ran into the blizzard. The snow was like powdered glass. I stumbled and fell. Then I saw it, shadows moving just beyond the reach of my flashlight, dark, formless, but watching. They followed me for hours. I don't know how I survived. Somehow I found a ridge and spotted a faint light in the distance, a ranger station, maybe a town. I ran toward it, tripping and falling until I finally collapsed outside the door. The warmth inside the station felt like salvation. The rangers thought I was delirious, hallucinating from exposure. I tried to explain, but my voice sounded foreign even to me. They listened, worried, and then assumed I'd been wandering for days alone. They didn't believe me when I said the cabin was alive. That night I slept in a real bed, safe. Or so I thought, because when I woke up, there was a note slipped under the door. You left, but we didn't. I left Nome that day, vowing never to return, but I still see the cabin in my dreams, and sometimes, when I'm alone, I hear whispers, cold as Alaskan wind, calling me back. Escaping the cabin should have been the end of my nightmare. But the truth is, it was just the beginning. Alaska doesn't let you go that easily, and what followed almost made me lose my mind. I thought I had escaped the nightmare of the cabin. I was wrong. Alaska has a way of making you feel safe, only to pull you deeper into darkness. What I found in the frozen forest is something I'll never forget. After the cabin, I couldn't stay in Nome. The note under the ranger station door, "You left, but we didn't," haunted me. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the cabin, the twisting shadows, and I heard the whispers. They weren't gone. They were waiting, just like that night, in the endless white. I decided to leave Alaska entirely. A flight out of Fairbanks was the fastest way, but getting there meant traveling through the interior, through forests I'd only seen in maps and photos. Roads snaked through the wilderness, but after the cabin, I trusted nothing. I rented a snowmobile, thinking it would be fast enough to escape if something tried to follow. The first day was uneventful. The sun barely rose, casting a pale orange light over the frozen landscape. Snow-laden trees stretched endlessly, heavy and silent. I felt isolated but reassured until night fell. I set up a small tent for the night, off the trail. I tried to rationalize the fear gnawing at me. The cabin had been an anomaly, I told myself, a single, terrifying place. But as darkness fell, the forest came alive. It started with sounds, soft, distant cracking, branches bending under invisible weight. I told myself it was just animals, wolves maybe, though I hadn't heard any howls. Then I heard the whispering again, low and guttural, echoing through the trees. I froze. My flashlight barely pierced the darkness. There was no wind, yet the trees swayed as if something large had passed through. The shadows seemed to stretch toward me, creeping along the snow like ink spreading on paper. Then I saw it. A figure standing among the trees. At first, I thought it was a moose, but it was wrong. Too tall, too thin. Its limbs bent at odd angles, and its face, I couldn't see it, but I knew it was watching me. I felt it in my chest, a presence pressing down, making it hard to breathe. I tried to speak, to call out, but no sound came. I grabbed my snowmobile keys and started the engine. The roar echoed through the forest, and the figure vanished, slipping between the trees like smoke. My heart raced as I sped along the trail, snow spraying behind me. Hours passed, or maybe minutes. It was impossible to tell in the blizzard that had begun. Visibility dropped to nearly nothing. I knew I should stop, but every instinct screamed to keep moving. That's when I noticed the tracks in the snow beside me. They weren't human, not fully. They had the shape of feet, but elongated, clawed, and they moved alongside me perfectly, keeping pace despite the speed. Panic overtook me. I pushed the snowmobile harder, my hands numb, my lungs burning. And then I saw them, more figures emerging from the trees. A dozen, maybe more, all tall, twisted, faceless. They didn't run, they glided, silent and smooth, like shadows given form. I couldn't look away. One reached toward me, its long fingers curling, just a few feet from my snowmobile. I crashed. Snow flew in every direction. I tumbled down a slope, the forest spinning around me. When I finally stopped, I was in a small clearing. My snowmobile was mangled, useless, and the figures were gone. But I could feel them in the air, the cold pressing against my skin in a way that felt almost alive. I stumbled through the snow, trying to find the trail. Every tree looked the same, and I couldn't remember which way I'd come. Panic turned into despair. Hours passed and the forest refused to let me go. Then I found it. A small, frozen creek. I followed it, hoping it would lead somewhere. The ice cracked under my boots. I stumbled, and as I fell, I saw something frozen beneath the ice. A human hand, pale, stiff, and clawed, not like any hand I'd seen before. Something unnatural had been here, something alive and dangerous. I didn't stop. I ran until I finally reached an abandoned ranger cabin deep in the woods. It was empty, but it had supplies, enough to survive the night. I locked the door and tried to sleep, but the shadows outside were patient. They circled the cabin, their whispers seeping through the walls. In the morning, I saw tracks in the snow, hundreds of them, radiating out from the cabin. They didn't belong to any animal I knew. They looked like human feet, twisted, broken, some with claws instead of toes. I realized then that the cabin, the forest, maybe even Nome itself, weren't places. They were traps. And whatever haunted them didn't want to kill me. At least, not yet. It wanted me to understand fear, to know that I could never truly escape. By the third day, I was delirious from hunger and cold. I didn't know how I survived, but somehow I stumbled onto a highway. A truck stopped, and a man offered me a ride to Fairbanks. I accepted without thinking, my body shaking from exhaustion and terror. Even in the warmth of the truck, I felt it. The presence, the whispers, the shadows creeping just out of sight. And I knew I hadn't outrun it. Alaska had marked me, and it wasn't finished. I reached Fairbanks and booked a flight out that evening. I thought the nightmare was over, but as the plane ascended, I saw them through the frosted window, silhouettes moving across the snow, gliding between trees, watching, waiting. I thought leaving the forest would save me, but what followed was worse. What came for me in the city, in the safety of human life, was something I couldn't have imagined. Alaska doesn't just haunt the wilderness, it follows you everywhere. You think once you leave the wilderness, you're safe. But sometimes, the terror doesn't stay in the mountains or the forest. It follows you to the city, to people, to your very mind. This is what happened to me in Fairbanks, Alaska. I thought boarding that plane out of Fairbanks would end it. I thought being around people, in the warmth, under lights, in a city, would make everything from the cabin in the forest feel like a bad dream. I was wrong. The moment I landed back in Fairbanks, I felt eyes on me. I chalked it up to paranoia. After all, I'd been alone in the wilderness for days, surviving on adrenaline and panic. But the feeling didn't leave. Every shadow in the airport seemed too long, every reflection slightly off. I caught glimpses of movement behind me, figures just beyond focus, twisted and tall, disappearing when I turned. I stayed in a small motel downtown. I wanted normalcy, food, a shower, and a bed that wasn't frozen. I wanted to forget. But that night when I closed my eyes, I saw them. The figures from the forest. The tall, thin ones, the faceless shadows. They weren't outside this time. They were in my room, standing just beyond the bed, leaning against the walls. I could feel the pressure, the cold creeping over me, sinking into my skin. I wanted to scream, but my voice didn't work. Days passed and the sightings continued. At first, I convinced myself it was stress, PTSD, hallucinations from exposure. But then came the whispers. Not the faint, distant whispers of the forest. They were louder here, sharper, inside my skull. They spoke a language I couldn't understand, a rhythm that matched my heartbeat. Every time I tried to sleep, it was worse. They were closer, pressing against my mind. One morning, I left my room to eat. I walked to a nearby diner, hoping human presence would calm me. But when I entered, everyone looked away. Not politely, not distracted. They all looked through me, like I wasn't there. I sat, ordered coffee, and tried to keep calm. That's when I noticed something on the floor. Tracks, footprints, clawed and elongated, leading straight to my table. I froze. No one else seemed to see them. My hands shook. I followed them with my eyes as they disappeared under the counter. I left the diner, convinced I was losing my mind. But every step outside felt wrong. Shadows seemed to stretch unnaturally along the streets. Streetlights flickered, Windows reflected not my face, but theirs, tall, faceless shapes leaning out from behind the glass, staring. I tried to contact friends, anyone who might understand, but my phone glitched. Photos I tried to take of the figures came out black, blank. Texts I sent never arrived. Even emails disappeared into the void. It was as if the world itself had been rewritten around me, erasing evidence that I existed. Then, it escalated. At night, the shadows didn't just watch, they moved. My motel room became a cage. Doors would slam open and shut without wind. Objects tipped over, scattered across the floor. I could hear scratching behind the walls, under the floorboards, in the ceiling. One night, I woke to the sound of breathing. Slow, wet, deliberate. I turned, expecting the shadows, and saw a figure at the foot of my bed. Its arms were impossibly long, dragging along the floor. Its face was smooth, featureless, but I could feel it staring, probing, learning me. I tried to move, to scream, but I was paralyzed. It leaned closer, and then I heard it. A single phrase, in English this time, but cold, mechanical, like broken glass scraping across ice. "You cannot leave Alaska." I ran. I didn't even pack. I didn't stop. The streets twisted behind me. The buildings shifted. I felt as if I was running in a nightmare, each step carrying me nowhere. The shadows multiplied, filling every alley, every street surrounding me. I found myself in an abandoned warehouse. I thought I could hide, but the air was alive with them, hundreds of tall, thin shapes whispering, sliding along the walls. One came close, bending impossibly, reaching toward me. I felt my mind being pulled, memories of the forest and the cabin flooding back, sharper, more painful. I screamed, and then I woke up. I was in a hospital. The doctors said I had collapsed from exhaustion, hypothermia, and stress. They didn't understand the bruises, the scratches along my arms, the patches of frost on my clothes. I didn't explain. Who would believe me? But even in the hospital, they followed. The shadows waited just beyond the blinds. At night, I could hear them whispering through the vents. When I closed my eyes, they were there, faceless, patient, promising that Alaska wouldn't let me go. I knew then it wasn't the wilderness, or the forest, or the cabin. It was something that lived in the cold itself, something that marked those who survived, those who thought they could escape. Something ancient, patient, and hungry. By the time I left the hospital, I was certain I had to leave Alaska, or at least try. I booked a flight, this time far enough from the interior in the north, thinking the lower latitudes might break the connection. But even on the plane, I couldn't shake the feeling. In the reflection of the window, I thought I saw them. Tall, faceless shapes pressed against the glass, riding alongside us at impossible speeds. And that's when I realized, it doesn't matter where I go. Alaska follows. Leaving the city didn't save me. What followed me out of Alaska into the world I thought was safe is something that no one should ever face. And this is how it all ends. I thought leaving Alaska would save me. I was wrong. Some things don't stay in the wilderness. They follow. They wait. And sometimes they come for you. I thought I had escaped. After the horrors of the forest and the city, I convinced myself that a flight to the lower 48 would break whatever connection had been made with me. I packed everything I could, sold what little I owned in Fairbanks, and booked a non-stop flight to Seattle. I had to get away. I had to believe that leaving Alaska would finally end the nightmare. But as the plane ascended, I felt it immediately. The cold. Not the ordinary cold of high altitude, but Alaska cold. Sharp, penetrating, crawling along my veins. My fingers went numb, my breath fogged, and I felt watched. I pressed my face to the window, hoping the clouds would hide it, but in the snowfields far below, I saw movement. Shadows, tall and impossibly thin, gliding over the frozen wilderness like hunters. And I knew then, they were coming. Seattle should have been different. A city full of people, lights, warmth. But even there, the shadows found me. At first, subtle things, a reflection in a darkened shop window that lingered too long, a figure standing across a busy street that vanished when I blinked. Then the whispers began again. This time in my ears, inside my skull, sharper than ever. "You cannot leave Alaska." I tried to ignore it. I moved into a small apartment downtown. I changed my phone number, rented a car, and avoided the forested edges of the city. But no matter what I did, the cold followed. My apartment windows would frost over, ice spreading in delicate, familiar patterns, patterns that looked like faces, watching. One night, I awoke to the scratching. At first, I thought it was a rat or a branch hitting the window, but the sound was deliberate, methodical. It was coming from inside the apartment. I reached for my flashlight. The beam landed on the shadows. Dozens of tall, thin forms pressed against the walls, their faces featureless, their limbs bent in ways no human could manage. I screamed. They didn't respond. They didn't need to. They already had me. In a moment of desperation, I remembered the cabin, the forest, the first place I'd encountered them. Perhaps it wasn't just a place, it was a key, a way to understand, maybe even fight. I realized then that I had to go back. There was no escaping. Alaska wasn't just a location, it was a presence, an entity, and I had been marked the moment I stepped onto its frozen soil. I flew back north, to the heart of Alaska, to the site where the cabin had been. But it wasn't there. The clearing was empty, snow blank and undisturbed. There was no trace of wood, no chimney, no fire pit. I wondered if it had ever been real, but the scratches on my arms, the frost on my apartment windows, the shadows that followed me everywhere, I knew it had. Then, in the forest beyond the clearing, I saw them. Hundreds of shadows gliding between the trees. They weren't hiding anymore. They were waiting. I ran. But the cold was alive, biting into my flesh, seeping into my mind. I tripped, fell into the snow, and tried to cover my face, screaming. The whispers surrounded me, chanting, calling my name. And then I saw it. A figure taller than the rest, limbs impossibly long, a face that was both everything and nothing. It extended a hand toward me. The frost on its fingers glimmered like ice knives, and it spoke clearly in the language of the snow and wind, a voice that resonated in my chest. "You belong here. You always belonged." I felt my body grow numb, my thoughts freezing, memories of the cabin, the forest, and Fairbanks flooding into one overwhelming storm of terror. I tried to run, but I was already inside their world now, their cold, endless, merciless world. Hours or maybe years passed. Time had no meaning. The shadows circled, whispering, always patient, always hungry. And I understood in that moment what they wanted. Not death, not yet, but submission. Complete surrender to the cold, to Alaska itself. I don't know how long I survived. I don't know if I truly did. Sometimes I wake in my apartment in Seattle and everything seems normal. But then I feel the cold crawling along my spine. I hear whispers in the wind. And I know they never left. They are patient. They will wait for me. Always. The last thing I remember before the darkness claimed me fully that day in the forest was the sensation of being lifted off the snow, held by hands of ice that were not hands at all, and whispered promises of eternity. Alaska does not forget. Alaska does not forgive. And now, I am part of it. Some places are meant to be left alone, some winters are meant to be feared, and some nightmares are not just dreams. This is my story, my warning. Alaska is not just a land of snow and wilderness, it is alive, and it remembers those who wander too far into its cold embrace. Some places are meant to be left alone, some winters are meant to be feared, and some nightmares are not just dreams. Alaska doesn't forgive, and now it has marked me forever. If you think you can brave the cold, remember this story. And remember this channel. Subscribe to Nightmares in the Dark for more true horror stories that will haunt your nights. Leave a comment if you've ever felt something watching you in the dark. And don't forget to hit the bell, because the cold never waits.